I am Aarti Subramaniam.
And I'm Tanvi Shukla, and we're back with Off the Record. And today, Aarti and I want to talk about hurting religious sentiments. More often than not, we see this becoming a controversy with every new show, sometimes with a new book, sometimes with a new TV series, with a new comedy gig or a joke that's been cracked online, offline, on OTT platforms, wherever. But, this has been a long-standing debate about what constitutes as hurting religious sentiments and what should be okay, what shouldn't be okay, legally speaking and otherwise.
And before we actually have this conversation, I think for the record, neither Tanvi nor me want to hurt anybody's religious sentiments. So I want to put that right at the start as a caveat here.
Yeah.
Let's first talk about the law as it stands. Now, hurting religious sentiments comes under 295A of the IPC. I just want to very briefly read out what it says. It says, deliberate and malicious acts intended to outrage religious feelings of any class by insulting its religion or religious beliefs. Now, the problem with the law is that it is very vague. It is very difficult to prove what is a deliberate and a malicious act. Now, we've seen Amazon Prime's head get into trouble because of Tandav. Tandav is a show, and I want to say I've not seen the show. I don't know the content that is allegedly offensive, but Tandav has gotten into a lot of trouble because the Allahabad High Court said the content of the show is unacceptable, it is offensive to Hindu sentiments. The matter is now in the Supreme Court, where Amazon Head has been, the Tandav makers have been granted anticipatory bail.
Yes, and all of this, Aarti, important to note, is still at the anticipatory bail stage.
Correct.
Right now, the courts are not even getting into the actual merits of, whether there is a crime committed, whether there was an intent by the series makers or by the Amazon officials to hurt the sentiments of the majority community, in this case the Hindu community, because the show is called Tandav and there are certain scenes linked to the gods within the Hindu religion. So even at the anticipatory stage, there is much that the courts have said, and obviously a huge debate, a political debate. There are complaints across the country. It's not just one complaint. In multiple states, people have gone and filed this complaint saying this content hurts my religious sentiment.
But Tandav was not the first show to have gotten into this sort of controversy. Perhaps it's the one which has gotten into the most trouble. But this 295A, hurting religious sentiments, has been slapped across a number of shows, a number of people. We've seen cases where Munawar Farooqi, the comedian who was arrested recently, he had the same allegation against him for which he was jailed. In the past, we've seen Kiku Sharta, again another comedian who was sent to jail for hurting religious sentiments.
Yes, and that was actually a case where the followers of the Dera Sachas or the sect got offended because he mimicked their guru, Gurmeet Ram Rahim, who also ended up in jail, by the way. That was one example. And you're talking about the three ladies.
The three ladies. Bharti Singh, Farah Khan and Ravina Tandon also had an FI registered against them under the same section. They were accused by members of the Catholic community, the Christian community, of saying something offensive, allegedly offensive, in a show that they were doing, and they had to apologize. One of the most interesting cases is can you believe it, even Mahendra Singh Dhoni, by the way, has had this case slapped against him. It was very innocuous, if you ask me. It was a magazine cover in which he was dressed as Lord Vishnu, and the title was The God of Big Deals, or The God of Big Bucks, talking about the endorsements that he was receiving. And the case was filed against him for hurting religious sentiments. The matter went to the Supreme Court, and we are going to talk to you about that case, because what the Supreme Court said in that case in 2017 is extremely important in judging and outraging over these cases that we're seeing now come up so frequently and so often.
Yes, so let me read that part. The case that you're referring to, and cover from 2013. And in 2017, when the Supreme Court ruled on it, the Supreme Court said, insults to religion offered unwittingly or carelessly or without any deliberate or malicious intention to outrage anybody's religious feelings of a class do not come within the section. So this was one example, Aarti, that you've picked up, where the court has made the distinction whether Dhoni intentionally with the picture wanted to hurt a sentiment, the sentiments of one community or class, and that's the distinction that was made, that this section penalizes only those acts of insults or those varieties of attempts to insult the religion which are perpetrated with the deliberate and malicious intention. So there has to be an intention. Of course, that always becomes a debating point. Ki intent tha ki nahi tha.
Correct, and that's a difficult thing, right? How are you going to prove that? Now, for example, I don't think you can even argue that the makers of Tandav wanted to create a law and order problem. I don't think they at any point deliberately wanted to, or to use the words a malicious intention of outraging religious feelings. Perhaps what they wanted to do, and I hate using this word, perhaps what they wanted to do is just be cool. Because this is an argument that is put forward a lot, and I want to step aside from the law here and just talk about what many are saying is a trend, that picking on Hindu gods, picking on Hindu symbols is easy prey. It's low-hanging fruit. Chalo, we can make fun of a Hindu god, we can make fun of a Hindu goddess, but we don't do the same for Islam, or we don't do the same for Christianity. And that, I think, is a complaint that we hear over and over again when cases like this come, that there is no parity, that there is a double standard. If it is freedom of speech to complain about or to mock or to satirize Hinduism, then why isn't the same applied for other religions?
Yes, in fact, and that is also what has been said in the Allahabad High Court order on the anticipatory bail plea of the Amazon officials. And the Allahabad High Court has gone into details of it to say, well, I see this as a trend from the 60s and the 70s, and he's referred to movies from that point of time to say, it's the Hindu gods and goddesses, or even mythological characters or great personalities who are revered up to Padmavati, and obviously the most recent cases, he's even named Munawar Farooqi, to say that I see this as a trend. And people are trying to make money. It's not just to say it's easy or it's cool, like you said, but also, according to the Allahabad High Court, the judge sees a merit in saying, well, you are trying to make money and commercially benefit out of this.
Yes, because I'll tell you what, and this is, if you see the trend, the people who have been complaining are those who belong to the majority community in India. That is the Hindus. They feel that a lot of the content is at their expense.
Yeah, but now, I disagree with that.
But just... I have a very simple yardstick when you look at these cases, right? The scene, the character, this whatever is said to be offensive, mocking, is it integral to the show in any way? Is it integral to the character in any way? If it is not, what purpose is it really serving them?
Okay, fair enough, but which should be actually for any good show and any good writing.
Exactly.
Right?
Exactly.
Whether it's the use of abuses, whether it's the show of even skill or characterization or references to history or mythological characters or religious characters must blend in.
Exactly.
In TV series or in a book, maybe in the context. But I don't think that this is just about one community. It sounds as if there are a lot more cases in our country against a majority religion, which is Hinduism, because there are a lot more of Hindus, and people who are also creating these jokes or writing these series also come from the same religion. But that's not to say, in our own examples, Aarti, we gave examples of Dera Sachcha Solar sect, we gave examples of Christians getting offended, and multiple FIRs in that case against Ravina Tandon and Farah Khan. We have examples of Priya Warrior, who in one certain movie, that young actress who she winked. Remember the girl who went famous for that winking scene in a Malayalam movie? In that specific movie, for a song that was used romantically, Muslims got offended. In fact, a lot of the examples, if you see in the recent past, have been about movies that have released based on Prophet Muhammad or making references to Prophet Muhammad. And there is again we see the same round of complaints, same kind of reaction. So I think it's not about one specific religion being targeted, but yes, within every religion there are certain segment of people who seem to get offended and object.
Ideally you shouldn't, right? Whatever your religion is, whether you're Hindu, Muslim or Christian, honestly, if you think you are going to be protecting your god or your religion from some sort of comedy, even if it's bad comedy, then you're giving yourself a bit too much importance, if you ask me. But what you say of this trend, right? It is something that is not exclusive to India.
It not.
Is something. So, for example, I was reading about Brazil. There was a show on Netflix in Brazil which showed Jesus Christ as homosexual and Mary as pot smoking weed. As smoking weed. So that show was taken down because there was so much of outrage about that show in Brazil, which is largely Christian, and there was so much of outrage about that show. A judge took it down, and the Supreme Court of Brazil reinstated it. But this is something that we see. You mentioned movies about Islam and the Prophet. There was this YouTube group that had released something called, I think it was called The Innocence of Muslims or something of that nature, which had riots. There were riots because of that in Egypt, in the Middle East. In fact, even in India in 2012, if I'm not mistaken, there were riots and the communal tension because of these movies. So, of course, that there is also that balance that filmmakers need to strike on. What is the intention?
But on the other hand, instances, and there are very, very few in a country like us, we are a lot more tolerant as a nation. While yes, we do complain, we do file complaints, and we take the path of legal recourse in expressing that. We could all protest out on the streets. Because of this, law and order situations have not happened that often, except when it becomes political. When it became political with in reference to Padmavati or Padmavati case, it did become political, and of course it became a big law and order issue, especially in northern India. But internationally, while Brazil is one example, you see a lot of stand-up comics using content, religion-linked content links to Jesus and others. Very often, a lot of them are openly even atheist, and they do make jokes about it very, very openly.
That's how you should be. In an ideal world, of course, you should be.
And of course, they also have the same debate about it.
In an ideal world, you should be able to take comedy, even and especially if it is about your religious beliefs. But as France now is learning, multiculturalism is a very, very tricky subject. We are either at the advantage or disadvantage, however you want to look at it, as having a very plural society where you have religious, cultural, so many more sentiments which are have to be looked at. In our country, if you throw a stone, someone will get offended.
Yes.
That's the kind of country that we come from. So whether it is a UK or whether it is US, they don't have those kind of law and order problems that they have to contend with. France is now beginning to realize that they do, and we've seen that with Charlie Hebdo. We've seen that recently when there were terrorist attacks as repercussions of those cartoons. France is now discovering that it is not easy. So in India, unfortunately, and I say this unfortunately because we would all want a society where people can understand the difference between humor and malicious and deliberate intent to provoke, that it is a very fine balancing act that you have to strike.
But exactly for those reasons, we shouldn't be comparing ourselves, whether it is to the Middle East or even to France, because again, I would rather live in a society which is pluralistic, proud to be pluralistic, and as tolerant as we are, without comparing. Because the minute you get into this comparison game to say, oh, look at the way the Muslims are responding in France, why is it a problem if the Hindus start responding in a very strong way in India? That's where the problem becomes. And in a pluralist society with so many religions, so many castes, so many sects, then you're spiraling down. There is no stopping. Then every religion will start getting more and more offended. Every sect, class will start getting more and more offended. As long as we find the legal recourse, it's still okay.
Correct.
If you take it beyond that, it's not all right in whichever country for whichever religion.
So that is the thing, right? In our law books currently, there exists this provision 295A. As long as that exists, people have the right to take recourse to it. Whether it's for extremely absurd reasons or not, the law as it exists, they are allowed to take recourse to it. There is absolutely no justification for protests or for violence, irrespective of which religion may or may not have been offended. It does happen, unfortunately. But as long as 295A exists, it allows room for legal recourse. Now, does such a provision even need to be there in our law books is the question, because A, it is vague, it is subject to misuse. You go down a very slippery slope where anybody can go and register a case or file a complaint, and then it opens up a can of worms.
And in multiple states, so it's it can also become a very, very dangerous tool of harassment. Where if you have against the same entity, individual or institution, you have 10 cases in 10 different states. The idea could also be to make that person run around and get caught in legal tangle for years together across the country, making representations of, which is why say for example in Tandav and Amazon's case, they have gone to the Supreme Court now, and where together the Supreme Court will have to look at this decision. And again, maybe we can look towards Supreme Court to give us some more clarity on the intent part. So because section 295A, which refers to hurting religious sentiments in a deliberate and malicious manner, the debate always is about how do you prove the intent? For example, another famous case was the Taslima Nasreen's case, and what she had written, in one of her books. Again, there also the courts went into the details in 2005. It was the Kolkata High Court, and the Kolkata High Court also said that the expression deliberate and malicious is indicative of the intention of the legislature. So how do you prove that the Taslima wanted to write this to provoke people? How do you prove that the makers of Tanda wanted to provoke the Hindu majority? Or how do you prove that Munawar, when he was talking to his friends and planning to crack a joke, was trying to provoke or wanting to provoke with a malicious intent the Hindu community? That intention is very important, and I think when we have this debate, we have to factor that in.
That is true, because this law is, of course, this section of the law is very prone to misuse, as we have been seeing in the past. As Tanvi was saying, you can file 100 cases in different parts of the country, and it is something that has been done in the past. So it's not much like sedition. In fact, this is another section of the law that we need to have an honest conversation about, whether it's time to relook this, whether we even need, whether it is sedition, whether we need these hurting the religious sentiments aspects in our penal code.
Yes, absolutely. And in many cases, you're seeing people apologizing when they see this kind of a response. And so, the legal cases don't really go anywhere. So perhaps now that they have gone to the court, despite giving an unconditional apology, the case continues. It will be interesting to see if Supreme Court has any more light to shed.
And if anything, I think the fact that we've also had such a heated discussion is indication of the fact that it's a subject which all of you feel very deeply about. Is this content offensive or not? But we would love to know what you think. Should we continue with this provision of the law which exists in our penal code? Is it time to be more open as a society and say, you know what, make fun of my God, make fun of my religion, make fun of me, and it's okay, I'm not going to go and complain to the police about you.
Off the record, Aarti and I often disagree and then agree to just disagree after heated conversations.
Just leave it there. That's how it should be. That's how it should be.
This is a wrap on this episode of Off the Record. Thank you for being with us.